Hello, Gaston County. Welcome to episode number 179. It's actually the first episode of season 8 of Gaston's Great, a podcast highlighting some of the great things happening in and around Gaston County. I'm your host, Stephen Long. We're coming to you once again from the international headquarters of GSM Services right here in downtown Gastonia. We have another great guest today. I'm very happy to have Dan Commerford on the podcast today. Did I pronounce that close enough?
Pretty close.
Okay, well.
Commerford.
Commerford. Sorry. That's what I do. Welcome to the podcast. We can't speak. But Dan is the senior pastor of First Presbyterian Church here in Gastonia and a fellow Rotarian. However, that's only one of the reasons he is on today. I'm looking forward to hearing about his leadership and community journey. Dan, it's great to have you on, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'll get your name right. I can pronounce Dan. Maybe not anything else, right? Where's your microphone today? All right. So how many podcasts do you think you have left to record? I know this is about Dan today, but we're going to talk about you for a second. Rachel. Okay. Before you leave us.
There's plenty of time for parting shots.
That is correct. Yeah. I better be quiet. All right. So normally I get right to it, but I got distracted there, Dan. So first thing we'd like to ask our guests is just, simply tell us a little bit about yourself. Anything you'd like to share, then we'll get into the main point of your being here today.
Yeah. So as you said, I'm currently serving as senior pastor of First Presbyterian Church, Gastonia. I have been there for almost 5 years. This July will mark 5 years since I started. Before serving here, I've served churches in South Florida, in the Jupiter area, as well as Atlanta. I was born and raised in Minnesota, and so it's a fun journey being in different places of the country and seeing how people work, how communities work, how God's working. Let's see. So born and raised in Minnesota, went to college there at Bethel University, went to seminary in Richmond, Virginia, and that was my introduction to the South. And so started going a little bit further south, serving in Atlanta, went real south in South Florida, which actually was more like being in the north, and then kind of coming back to the sweet middle of North Carolina.
Oh, that's funny.
But we found a good home here. I am married to my beautiful wife, Rachel. We celebrate our 15th year anniversary this July. And then we have 2 children. Hannah is 10 and Micah is 6, and they both attend Gaston Day. So in some ways, we feel that this place, Gaston County, is our home. It's where my children especially, it's most of what they remember. And then in some ways, I love watching what is happening here and being a part of what is happening here with new eyes.
Well, that's terrific, and I appreciate you sharing that, Dan. So this time of year, are you a person you're glad that you're here in the South with this weather, or do you miss the brutal winters of Minnesota?
That's a great question. Growing up in Minnesota, I thought this is how everyone had to suffer, which people don't realize. Winter up in Minnesota or up north can be very beautiful, and it was very beautiful for a couple months. November, December, the holiday season. I have memories of this soft, beautiful snow that's coming down to the ground on Christmas Eve. But then what happens is the next 4 months is this slow thawing out where the snow becomes heavier, it gets all grimy and full of dirt. And so that's really what I don't miss. So what I love about living here in Gaston County is we experience all of the weather, but we never experience it for too long. So if you don't like it, you wait for a little bit and it changes. And for most of the year, it's pretty temperate. So I would be one of those people who grew up in the snow and doesn't care to see a flake of snow again in his life. But when it comes down a little bit and my kids have fun, I can have fun with them.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So I have a good contractor buddy who lives. His business is just west of Minneapolis, and he sent me a video several years ago of opening their door to their office and him throwing out hot water out of the door, and it immediately crystallized. I was sure at that moment that I'm good here. That's pretty extreme.
I have memories as a child doing that exact same thing.
I mean, wow. So, again, I appreciate you sharing that. And, it's a good story to, I would assume you have a good perspective when you do get to live at different places. I mean, I've traveled a lot of places. I've only lived in 2 really for extended periods. And so, but I'm grateful for it here. So why, we have had a lot of talks about religion here a little bit, spirituality in general, but why the ministry? What led you to this line of work, and then kind of what led you here to Gastonia?
I grew up in church. I didn't grow up Presbyterian. I grew up in a big non-denominational church. And though if you were to ask my youth pastor, if you were to tell him, Dan was going to become a pastor when I was in middle school and high school, he would laugh, and now he still does laugh when we talk about it, but he also says it really makes the most sense in the world. There has always been a pull to faith that is explored in the context of Christian community. For me, it's always been the center of my life. It's been the lens through which I see everything. And so ministry for me is an opportunity to help others discover that. And so it's been a journey that I didn't know where I was going to land or if I was going to be a pastor. When I was in college, I thought maybe I was going to go down the medicine path and be a doctor or something like that. But there was this pull of ministry that kept on tugging at me. And so that's what led me to get a biblical theological studies degree in college, and then pursue it further in seminary. And there was a moment in seminary that was really pivotal for me because I loved studying. I loved the academic work. I loved sitting in a class and exploring. I also loved teaching in class, and I did a little bit of that as a TA in college. But I remember a professor sitting me down and saying that I have to decide who I want to spend my time with as a profession. Do I want to spend my time with people who are alive today? And if that's the case, then church ministry would be a good path. Or do you want to spend your time with people who have been dead for 400 years? And if that's the case, then you need to go down the PhD route because you're reading from all of these church leaders who have long since passed but still shape us today. So I was a people person, continue to be someone who loves being with people and growing with people. And so all of that has kind of led me to be a pastor.
So is it fair to say that that pull was just something that gradually occurred, over a longer period of time, and maybe that seminal moment when a professor or someone said, "Hey, here's the difference," but somebody was able to show you or talk to you about the difference between those two paths?
So us Presbyterians, we call this a call story, and that pastors or people who are called into ministry have a sense of call. And that's this idea or this belief that God is calling us into this kind of life. Because we could take the same skills and accomplish the same type of the kind of ministry as leading a company or working in a nonprofit or working for a community, but working in a church is a special type of path. And so when you look back, you can kind of see the waypoints of, oh yeah, like that's God's kind of helping me guide through that point. But in those moments, yeah, I guess the way I approached it was to keep as much of my path open as possible and see where God leads me. And that's what's led me here. And it's worked out. It hasn't always been easy. I can't say that it is mistake-free because that's the human element in it. But ultimately, it's this belief that if we are faithful and we follow God's voice, that's what will lead us to where we're supposed to be.
All right. Okay, that's a great story and a great segue to, the thing that we'd really like to talk about here, leadership and community, how that ties in with individuals' personal lives, their professional lives. So I've been involved in church my entire life, currently, and have been for almost 30 years, a member of a Methodist church here locally, First Methodist in Gastonia, and without a doubt, senior pastors specifically, they're viewed as the leaders of the church. That at least that entity, and I'm sure I will use some language that's probably not completely accurate, but along this path, this journey to get you here, which is I'm sure is peaking today on the Gaston's Great podcast. What are some leadership lessons you've learned? What have you taken, and maybe that where you might lead differently now than when you first arrived maybe at your first church?
That's another great question.
I don't hear that very often. Thank you.
Leadership has been something that I've always been interested in, and one of my passions is watching others develop a passion for their faith, to help them grow in their faith, but then also to help them use their faith to make decisions in their lives, to set their values, but then to go out and do something about it, because there's an active part of the Christian faith that it's not just about believing, but it's also about going and continuing that ministry that Christ began. At least that's a big part of the Reformed tradition of which the Presbyterian Church is a part. I think my journey from my first church to here, it's that cliched, I know more of what I don't know. We get out of seminary and we're put in churches, and we try to apply what we've learned in school, and in some ways it works great. But the journey that I've really enjoyed is getting to know people and understanding life more, maybe gaining some more life experience, both experiences that I can celebrate, experiences that are difficult. And in that, it continues to shape me. And so as I lead an organization, as I lead a congregation and its leaders, as I try to be a part of leading a community to be the best it can be, I've really been on this path of learning to get buy-in from others, and how important it is, especially in a church where you are serving with others who are there on their own volition. They have their ideas and dreams, and we're in the business of listening to God. And God speaks to us better as a community than I believe God speaks to us as individuals. So that's the beautiful mess of leadership in a church, is when a bunch of people come into a room. They can love the congregation and its people. They can love the community, and they can prayerfully be discerning where God is leading us. And then from that, we all have different ideas, or 4 or 5 ideas might come to the surface that are different and might conflict with one another. So I've learned in leadership, especially of churches, is the process of discernment and allowing those different ideas to be fleshed out, and to find critical buy-in from the group before moving forward. It's easy for the pastor to say what he or she thinks. The older I get, the more I am trying to listen first and speak second. It's still
that's a great leadership lesson right there.
Still a lesson that I continue to try to learn. The leaders in my church will probably tell you that. But in doing that, it's finding that solution, or finding that thing, whatever you're searching for. It is so much more powerful when the group can proclaim that together. And maybe it's not everyone has 100% confidence in that, but everyone has enough confidence in that one thing that everyone can get on board and be a part of making that become a reality.
You mean there are organizations that everybody doesn't agree on everything? I'm kidding.
Especially in churches.
So Gosh, you covered a lot right there, Dan. One thing that just comes to mind is, I know when I got out of college with my engineering degree, boy, I knew it all, right? Or at least I thought I did, and it didn't take me very long to be humbled very quickly with, I think the phrase you used was, you've learned more about what you don't know, all right? And that's a great leadership lesson, I think, humility and listening. Humility forces listening if you're working on your leadership journey. Anything come to mind, whether it was a teacher, a family member, a church member, any piece of leadership advice you were given that has stuck with you? Or is it just be quiet and listen?
I have been told to be quiet and listen, but no, what I think of is not necessarily one person, because it really is it's the combination of a lot of small conversations that you have in time, moments. Let me back up, because one of the things I love about Presbyterianism, I love it, but it also is the thing that can be most frustrating sometimes, is that pastors and leaders in the church, and in the Presbyterian church, we elect elders to serve for a certain period of time. We work together to do about 95% of the church's work. There's only a very few things that a pastor can do unilaterally. And so when we get together and govern, we are forced to listen to one another. And so as a pastor, we are put in settings, and they'll call us to a church and say, we have these hopes, we have these dreams, we are imagining where God is leading us. And then they ask the pastor to help lead them on that. But then I think where the critical work comes is the relationships that are formed. And I've had many conversations with elders in the church who are a couple seasons ahead of me in life. Maybe they have led their own organizations. They haven't ever been pastors, but they have worked in churches and have been doing ministry longer than I've been alive. And so in listening to their experiences and listening to their encouragement and receiving that, and but then also listening to the moments when they say, well, 20 years ago, we tried this and this is how it panned out, which doesn't necessarily mean we can't try it again, but it's good to have that knowledge, is always helpful.
Sure.
It's data to take in, and you take that into account, and it helps us avoid landmines. So that's part of being a Presbyterian pastor. There is always this conversation and these conversations that are happening with church leaders and those who are called to lead with the pastor to move the church in a faithful direction. So, you ask about one moment, one pivotal moment. I can't really bring up one specifically, but I can tell you it's something that happens all the time. I tell my elders all the time that I am listening. I listen to everything that the wisdom that is shared, and sometimes you can see the fruition of that wisdom right away, and sometimes it's something that I have to listen to and wrestle with in my mind for a long time and challenge it, and then eventually it'll come out to say, like, wow, like that person was really wise, and I'm glad that they told me that, even though it took me 6 months to work it out.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common for certain types of personalities like mine. Let's take the data, let's listen to it, let's chew on it a little bit, and then sometimes it's unfortunately longer than it should be before it registers like it should. What about community? I know my view, again, I've grown up in a church. I actually grew up ARP here in Gastonia, and I've only been officially members of two churches. But I always associate those church, the physical church, and the organization, as community involved, community servants. I mean, every church I've been involved with, there's always the mission work here locally, maybe even internationally as well. But how does community? I know I mentioned in the introduction we are Rotarians together here. But I know, I would assume, I shouldn't say I know, would assume that the bulk of your community involvement is just through the church in general with your congregation. So how does that play in that leadership, in that calling maybe that you had to be where you are, and how do you view that from a church perspective?
I want to start by saying how one of the characteristics of this community that is so special is its values that want to bring the community together and to have this community be the best it can be, as well as the church's explicit involvement in that vision. Okay. And that's not how every community works. Sometimes a community has different centers of influence, and churches are only looked at as a place of worship, or if you are a member of that church, you just go there and you worship God there and you attend Bible study there, and it's a place for you to grow in faith. But not necessarily, there's not a tie of taking that faith and taking those values and applying them in the community. There is a very strong value system in this community that encourages its members and its leaders to become involved, to get to improve the community, to make it a little bit better than what it was or what it is. And so I see that as a huge part of what I do as a pastor, because on one hand, part of my focus is inward, to be a shepherd of the flock, the leader of the congregation. And so a lot of my time is spent tending to that flock, preaching messages that I feel God is speaking to that community, being there for the community, for its members in good times and in difficult times. But then there's also this other component that one is incomplete without the other, where as we take care of one another, as we do what we can to be the strongest congregation that God's calling us to be, we do that so that we can go out and help the community and strengthen the community as we have been strengthened. And we do that through the lens of our faith, through the values that we have formed. So as a pastor of a community in this community, I have grown to appreciate how on the nose that is, and that it's not something that needs to be encouraged or sussed out or created, but it is really cooked into the DNA of this community.
So does something in your time here in Gaston County, is something jump out, whether it's through First Presbyterian or Rotary or something else you might have been involved with, something that stands out like, wow, that confirms the mission of our church, or things that I like to be involved with, something specific that jumps out at you, you're most proud of being involved with or seeing happen?
I think from a 10,000-foot view, it's the fact that this community continues to grow and have dreams and have a vision after its economy has completely changed. So if we rewind back to 2020, and I tell you, when I started here in 2021, but the conversations with the nominating committee who searches for the next pastor, that's when they began. And they reached out to me. They got my name from my seminary. I didn't know that they were shopping my name around, nor was I looking for a new call. I was serving at my previous church. If you remember, in 2020, there was this thing called the pandemic that was going on. And we were just trying to survive the pandemic like everyone else, but we heard from this church. And long story short, at the beginning, I didn't think that we were being called somewhere else, but through a lot of conversation and prayer, we came to this place, my wife and I, where we felt like we might be called here. And so they had us come and visit. And that was the first time that I got this sense of what I just articulated about the desire to continue to move forward as a community. And what my wife and I saw as complete newcomers, we had never stepped foot in Gastonia or Gaston County, It was a rainy Valentine's Day weekend in 2021 at that point. But by that time, I had read the history of the church and had learned about the strong mill and textile economy that was here and how that had changed.
Sure.
And I know of several other communities by churches that I had previously served where the mill was thriving and the town was thriving. And then when the mill closed, the town went into poverty. And we didn't see that here. We saw that economy has changed in a community that went through some hard times, but there was this resilience and desire to adapt to where times were leading and this dream of what Gastonia could be. So there was this desire, but then we also we also sensed that it had the people and the leadership and the capacity to be the community that it could be. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That's good. Yeah.
But it's what got me really excited about this idea of moving from South Florida to Gastonia. If I can tell a quick story, when I was doing all of this discerning work, because that's when we pray to God saying, "What do I do, God?" I called one of my college professors who grew up in Charlotte, and I said, there's this church in Gastonia that is calling and inquiring about me becoming their senior pastor. And there was a moment of silence. And he said, you are thinking of moving from the beach in South Florida to Gastonia, North Carolina. He said, you have to understand that those are two totally different types of communities. And he said it half as a joke, and I've come to learn that Gastonia is often the butt of jokes from people who, as a newcomer, they don't get this community. And so, I shouldn't throw him under the bus because he's been so happy that we moved here, that we followed God's call, and that Gastonia continues to make steps. But I think ultimately that's what makes this community special, and where the church is, there's a real partnership between the congregations in the community. And I really love that. I love that I can run into someone in the community, whether it's at Rotary or at another event, and they might be a member of First Methodist, they might be a member of First ARP or another church, but that seems secondary to this shared desire that we're in a collective journey and we're in this journey together. And so that's the journey that I really feel honored to be a part of.
Well, I appreciate it. I especially appreciate that perspective you have as coming here, right? Because I know that growing up here, I think we take some of that. It's easy to take some of that for granted, that cohesiveness or that unity we kind of have in our community. So I do appreciate you sharing that. What's next? This is a question that I'm really interested to hear your view on. What's next for you in your work, and then in a broader scale, kind of what's the next for lack of a better term, organized religion, churches? I feel like First Methodist and has been impacted, I'm not saying permanently necessarily, but COVID really did a number on churches, nonprofits, just a lot of, it was just such a strange time. And even virtual church, that wasn't a thing. And now it still is a thing, it seems like. So I'm just saying in general, what's next for you and First Presbyterian Church and then organized religion in general? Is that too big of a question that you don't want to answer?
No, not at all. What's next for First Presbyterian Church is we are continuing to reflect on where we are as a community, and I think any church that has a history like First Presbyterian Church, like First United Methodist Church, like First ARP, First Baptist, any of these churches, there is so much of a story that has already been told, and that story is a part of the congregation's DNA. And First Presbyterian Church is no different. And I have a deep respect and an admiration for its history and what some of its members have done in the past, and how this church has been a part of the life of not only its members but the community. But we also know that this community is rapidly changing, and you just have to drive down New Hope Road to be reminded of how quickly this is changing. When I first, when I first got here, I was encouraged to never associate Gastonia with Charlotte. And I still adhere to that wisdom, again, that some of those elders have told me. But I also see Charlotte as a metropolitan area coming out this way, and the people who are living here are not they're not associated with the mill economy. They are moving here because they might have a job in Charlotte.
Sure.
But they want to have a little bit of a bigger house and a bigger yard, or they want to live in a place that has a sense of community, and this offers them that sense. So as a church that used to be a church for people who were part of what Gastonia was, now we're asking, how can we be the church for what Gastonia is today and what Gastonia will be? One of the initiatives that we are pursuing right now is an expansion of our preschool. So the same preschool that you attended, one thing that we have studied and we've realized is that people who are moving into Gastonia, most of them are either single parents or families where both parents are working. And so for that reason, they need to have a place for their young children to be all day. So one of the initiatives that we are just in the beginnings of creating is augmenting our half-day preschool program into a full-day daycare, preschool, day school. And that's something that has come with a lot of excitement, a little bit of trepidation, because we don't know where it's going to land or how that's going to impact some of the ministries that we have been doing for a long time. But that's what's coming next for us as a church. It's part of a wider exploration of how we can be faithful to Christ today and set ourselves up to be faithful in the future. And that really ties into the second question that you asked, and that's the big question that sometimes it keeps me up at night when it shouldn't, because at the end of the day, the short answer is that we have faith that God is going to be the same God that was, is, and always will be. And the church as a whole has gone through periods of great expansion and influence, and it's also gone through periods of shrinking and challenges. I think where the church is heading today, I won't discount or deny the statistics that we know, is that less and less people are claiming that faith is a part of their lives. Less and less come to church. We know that statistically, that and then those who do associate with a church or belong to a church go to church less frequently. I think there's a lot of competition out there, and I'm just entering into this phase with my children. It's really hard to find time for my family, my wife, my faith, my work, when your kids have extracurriculars all the time. And there's something about our society that has vaulted that to the top priority of our lives.
Yeah, I have 3 kids, and I remember those. I remember all that.
My
kids are older than yours. Well, eventually they leave. 2 of ours have left, and one is still in college, so that has slowed down dramatically. But we tend to fill it with other things too sometimes, and maybe not. And sometimes that list might not be prioritized like it should be.
Well, and you mentioned so other things. So there are other things that people are drawn to. I still think that we as human beings are always searching for a sense of meaning and belonging and purpose. And for the longest time, our faith and then the faith community, it was cooked into our culture that's where you went to go find that. And so for a church to be thriving, you just needed a pastor and some leaders to put a Sunday worship service together and a Sunday school class, and people were just bursting through the doors. Well, today there's a lot more competition. And where I see that is a challenge for us to remain relevant while staying who we are, because our values don't change, our God hasn't changed, our faith hasn't changed, but the world has changed. And so how we live our faith and how communities of faith gather and practice their faith can look different. Like, there's a reason why we don't do church the same way today as we did in the 1600s. There's technology, there's new types of music, there are paved roads, and so so we already have adapted in the broad history of the church. And I think we're living in one of those moments again where we have to discern, how can we be faithful to the same God that we worship, while also taking into account the reality of the times in which we live. And just one last thing on that is that all of this technology and ways to, I would call them artificial community, or there's another term, artificial intimacy that people might find. And it started with social media 20 years ago, and maybe before that, other forms of digital relationships. I don't think people are really happy with that. And so we live in a time that people are more anxious and lonely and isolated. And I think the solution is right there.
Yeah, I believe that I don't want to say there's anything positive from the pandemic, but I think it really exposed the need for that personal interactions, the personal contact of that, because of it's just. And I think I was kind of less aware of it beforehand, maybe, even though I'm advanced in age compared to anyone else here in the room today. But yeah, I do think that's important. So I appreciate that. And for me growing up, we just went to church. That's what we did. I came a little disconnected going off to college. Then my wife and I got married. We were at different churches. We got married. I grew up Presbyterian. She grew up Baptist. We got married in one of the last weddings at the old First Baptist, on Franklin Boulevard. And then our kids are Methodist, and we got an NC State in North Carolina involved in there too. So our kids are just all confused.
Sounds like a fun Thanksgiving.
Yeah. But it's just what we did. And I think, and then we got married and had a child, then we were like, okay, we've got to go find a youth program, because that's what we want for our children, is to be brought up in that environment. And we found First Methodist, and it was great. And it was a terrific experience, and it still is. My wife and I love First Methodist. We love the people there. We love the pastors there. It's still very, something that's still very important to us. So it's interesting. I appreciate your willingness to talk about that, because it is kind of this underlying for faith, people who are faithful and who are involved in church. It's an interesting dynamic or evolution that I've seen over my lifetime, so I appreciate that. So I know, Dan, you've got other things to do today besides talk to us, but before we finish, we'll make sure that we let you, how can people learn more about First Presbyterian Church and anything else? Is there anything I haven't asked that I should have asked, something that you want to make sure you cover before we kind of do a couple of questions that we make our guests endure?
I don't think so. If you're looking for a church home, we would love to have you try First Presbyterian Church out. And so you can find us online at www.fpcgastonia.org. And I think that's often the first place that people will look. You can find videos of our worship services. We worship at 9 a.m. in our fellowship hall. That's a more casual service. And then we have a traditional service at 11 a.m.
Yeah, and if you're right on Garrison Boulevard, easiest description I said, right across from Greer Middle School. So that's and it's been there a long time.
1621 East Garrison Boulevard, the big gray steeple.
Yeah. So, okay, I appreciate that, Dan. So before we finish up, we do have a few questions that I would like to make our guests endure. And the first one is one I like to talk about because this is a podcast about Gaston's Great. We're talking about things that are positive in our community, and I believe that First Presbyterian Church is one of those things. I've been there many times for all kinds of events. And from your perspective, you've been here long enough now to be able to answer this. Why would you say that Gastonia and Gaston County is such a great place?
I think it's great because of the combination of its resilience and its adaptability. Its resilience is coming from navigating a changing of economy and still coming out the other side with people who are committed to the community. But then also a sense of curiosity and adapting to make this community what the wider region needs. So many communities are locked in on who they are, who they've been, and they're never going to change. And I believe that those are communities that dwindle and die. But I think Gastonia and Gaston is great in general because it is resilient. It has navigated tough times. It's experienced wonderful times. It's navigated tough times. And I still think it's positioned to be a thriving community because of its a willingness to adapt to what the current needs are for the region.
All right. Well said. I'm not sure we've had anybody in 170 plus episodes. I'm not sure we have anybody articulate it exactly like that. So I appreciate that. I love this question. Dan, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Oh, man. Listen first. Speak second.
That's like a universal one that I wish I knew when I was younger.
Yeah. And also don't stop worrying. And that's something that I has been a journey for me on worrying and wanting to know what's happening, what the next 5 steps are, either in my life or the church's life. And what I wish I could tell my 20-year-old self is, man, just have fun where you are and enjoy what God's doing in your life because there's so much to be grateful for.
Yeah, what's that great scripture, basically is worry about today's problems. Tomorrow's going to have enough problems. That's not worry, but let's deal with today's problems, and tomorrow's problems will take care of themselves when you get there.
Yeah, those are Jesus's words, and I think he said it better than any of us could.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking back, is there someone or something, maybe more, hopefully someone who has made the biggest impact on you professionally from a community standpoint, leadership, or somebody who you look back and say, wow, yeah, that was impact. They were really impactful to me.
I've been blessed to have some good mentors in my life and people who, again, are a few steps ahead of me in age and in their career. God's always put people in my life to make sure that I don't drive myself off a cliff, because I think I would if I didn't have those people guiding me. And so I want to give a special shout out to Christian Collins Wynn. He is he's my professor from college, my theology professor. Not only did he help shape me theologically, but has continued to be a friend in ministry. And then right after we're done today, I'm going to go have lunch with another mentor of mine. His name's Glenn Bell, and he is a soon-to-be retired Presbyterian minister. Okay. And he kind of took me under his wing. He realized that I was this Presbyterian minister who didn't grow up Presbyterian, and has helped me along the way. And so I'm grateful for those two, and there are so many others. I don't have time, but that's it's been a blessing in life to have others to help me be the best I can be.
Oh, that's great to hear. And you know what? I've been fortunate as well to have people like that in my life. And I'm surprised you didn't say the corner Rotary table.
Y'all are my saving grace sometimes, but
yeah, to make you realize that how good of a person you actually are. So I got the last question. And I'm not going to let you answer the obvious answer, okay? And it would be my answer as well if I was forced to only answer one person. But if you could have coffee or dinner with one historical person, who would it be and why?
So the obvious answer that you're saying is Jesus, right?
Correct.
Because everyone would want that.
Yes.
And you're right. My first choice would be Jesus. My second, George Washington. I mean, when you want to talk about leadership and being able to navigate adversity and bring a bunch of different people together, and the way that he put the mission of the country above his own aspirations, set a model for our nation to be successful. Boy, would I love to ask him some questions about leading people.
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, I've read and listened to a lot of podcasts about him and read multiple books on him, and it's just fascinating, especially to know what we know now. But at the time, trying to get that perspective of the uncertainty of all that time, what they were dealing with, and he was kind of that. Yeah, he's a very interesting guy, and I appreciate that. He would be probably on my top 10 list. For sure, people I would like to sit down and ask a few questions like, how in the world, how did y'all do that? And how did you accomplish that? And how did you think that? Because I don't know that I would have. So again, I appreciate that. So before we finish up, Dan, any last words? I always finish up with a quote or some book recommendation. I'm going to do a couple of book recommendations before we finish. But any last word before we close this episode out? This has been terrific.
The last word that I'd like for anyone listening is to never lose hope. And hope is the gift that God gives us. And no matter how hard times are, whether it's times that we're navigating individually in those challenges or challenges that we're seeing in our community or our nation, we will always be tempted to pack it up and go home. But I encourage us to never lose hope, because in Christ, there's always a way forward.
I appreciate that. And I would agree. And on that note, something that I do daily is I've got a couple of devotionals I read. Two of them typically are spiritual, and I'm going to share those. One I've read before, the one one I just started in the middle of last year, oddly enough, for some reason. But the first one is titled "My Utmost for His Highest" by Oswald Chambers. If you're not familiar with him, he's terrific, and it is very spiritually based. And the other one is by a gentleman named Bob Goff. It's called Catching Whimsy. And Bob Goff has written a lot of books. But to Dan's point, that helps me stay hopeful. Reading things like that consistently, and reading, frankly, for me personally, reading the Bible as well, but doing something intentional, because, man, if you pay attention to the news, you run a business, you have kids, you have family, gosh, there's always something going on, right? And some of it's out of our control, some of it's not, but our viewpoint and not losing that hope. I appreciate you in with that, Dan, because I do think that is something important. And it's easy to get off track if you don't have something helping with that foundation. What are the people you're spending time with? What is their view and their outlook? So all that stuff matters. And so, I'm grateful and appreciate that. But those might be two good books worth checking out. So this has been great. As always, thanks to our listeners for taking the time to listen to today's episode. Please continue to spread the word if you can about the podcast. And please don't hesitate to contact us here at our email address, which is podcast@gastonsgreat.com. We're always looking for suggestions for future podcast topics and guests. You can find the podcast and subscribe at the website, gastonsgreat.com, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Please follow us on all our social media platforms. And as Rachel always reminds me, giving us a good 5-star rating helps the podcast get noticed. Right, Rachel? All right. Thanks again to Dan for being our guest today. Gaston's Great is produced and brought to you by Rachel Cowart from GSM Services. I'm your host, Stephen Long. Thanks again for hanging out with us, and please keep coming back to hear more reasons why Gaston's great.